Hello there, and welcome. Tonight, we'll travel not through space, but through something just as vast, the landscape of the human mind. Every thought, every reaction, every instinct you've ever had is part of a living constellation inside your brain, an inner galaxy made of memory, biology, and emotion. Personality isn't a mask. It's a fingerprint of the soul written in chemistry and shaped by time. Why are some drawn to chaos, while others find beauty only in order? Why do some chase risk, while others crave calm? Beneath those differences lie ancient codes, whispers of survival, love, and curiosity written into the folds of our being. Tonight, we'll explore 100 mind-bending facts about what makes you uniquely you. And while you're settling in, before your eyes grow too heavy, I'd love it if you gently tapped subscribe or pressed the little hype button YouTube recently added. It's a small click, but it helps keep these experiments and explorations orbiting out into the algorithm. You can also leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the night. It's oddly fascinating to see where people are drifting off with us, scattered across the world like stars across the galaxy. Now take a deep breath, let your day drift away, and let's travel together into the quiet corners of the universe. Long before we learn to speak, before our eyes open to light, before a heartbeat echoes through a room, the foundations of who we are begin quietly taking shape. In the dark warmth of the womb, a symphony of biology and chance begins composing the first notes of a personality. Tiny fluctuations in hormones, temperature, and timing weave together like invisible threads, each one contributing to the subtle architecture of individuality. Even here, before breath or thought, no two lives form exactly the same way. Within weeks of conception, the earliest blueprint of temperament begins to unfold. The developing brain grows at an astonishing pace, guided by both genetic instruction and the chemical whispers of the surrounding environment. Stress hormones in the mother's bloodstream can ripple through the placenta, slightly shifting how the fetus will one day respond to fear or comfort. A few degrees of warmth or a brief surge of adrenaline may alter how certain neural pathways connect. What seems like nothing in the moment becomes something enduring, a faint leaning toward caution or curiosity or calm. Identical twins share the same DNA, yet they rarely share the same soul. One may emerge quiet, observant, inwardly turned. The other bold, expressive, drawn to the world's noise. Their genetic code begins as a mirror, but their experiences in the womb bend that reflection. Each twin occupies a slightly different pocket of space, receiving different amounts of nutrients, oxygen, or maternal hormones. One may be nestled closer to the placenta, receiving richer blood flow. The other may feel the subtle rhythm of touch or vibration more strongly. Over months, these microscopic differences compound, writing distinct emotional scripts into the same genetic manuscript. Inside this prenatal universe, the first hints of temperament begin to surface. Fetuses move differently. Some thrash, others drift gently. Scientists who observe these motions with ultrasound note consistent patterns that later align with early personality traits. A fetus that moves often tends to become an infant more active and easily stimulated. A quieter fetus often grows into a child who prefers calm and predictability. Even heartbeat rhythms tell a story. Babies with steadier heart rates in utero often develop into more even-tempered toddlers, their physiological calm echoing the peaceful tempo that began months before birth. The nervous system becomes the great conductor of this hidden orchestra. Billions of neurons branch out and link together, testing pathways, pruning connections, rehearsing signals long before they will be used. These patterns will guide how easily the child adapts to change, how deeply they feel joy or alarm, how quickly they recover from stress. The brainstem and limbic system, ancient structures that regulate emotion and survival, start forming early, sculpting the contours of instinct before consciousness ever arrives. By the third trimester, the fetus can recognize the mother's voice, responding with shifts in heart rate or motion. It is learning the first shape of comfort, the first association between sound and safety. Even the mother's emotional world becomes part of the story. When she laughs, her body releases endorphins that drift into the amniotic sea, a chemical lullaby that may soften the fetus's stress responses. When she is anxious, cortisol levels rise, signaling that the outside world can be unpredictable. The fetus listens in its own way, adjusting its internal chemistry to match the rhythm of that world. Over time, these subtle exchanges create the earliest sketches of emotional resilience or sensitivity. The boundary between mother and child is not a wall but a membrane through which moods, molecules, and music flow both ways. Genes, though powerful, are not dictators. They are instructions waiting for interpretation, and the environment begins interpreting them from the start. A single gene may produce different outcomes depending on which signals reach it first. The machinery of epigenetics, the system that turns genes on or off, responds to the surrounding conditions like an artist blending new shades of color. This is how two individuals, born with the same genetic notes, can grow into entirely different songs. The environment plays the melody, and the genome learns to harmonize. As the months pass, the brain begins to loop through patterns of sleep and wakefulness, bursts of motion and stillness, rehearsal and rest. These cycles echo the circadian rhythms that will later govern moods, energy, and focus. The fetus practices breathing, swallowing, kicking, responding to touch. It rehearses life before living it, testing its reflexes against a world it has not yet seen. Every movement strengthens connections between brain and body, between impulse and outcome. Slowly, it learns the language of cause and effect, the earliest whisper of intention. By the time the child is ready to be born, personality is already a quiet hum beneath the skin. It is not yet defined by words like shy or bold, but by tendencies, the ease of soothing, the reaction to novelty, the way eyes widen or narrow at sound. These are the seeds from which future character will grow. Some babies will cry fiercely at first contact with light. Others will gaze silently as if absorbing everything at once. These differences are not random. They are the first expressions of the self that has been gathering strength for months in darkness. Scientists sometimes call this early foundation temperament, but the word feels too small for what it really is. It's more like a gravitational pull, an invisible force shaping how we orbit the experiences to come. Life will later add layers of memory, culture, trauma, love, and choice. But this primal map remains underneath it all. The adult who hesitates before speaking, who thinks twice before acting, may carry the echo of a cautious heartbeat heard before birth. The one who seeks out motion, light, and sound may be reliving the restlessness of those first underwater kicks. Each of us is, in some way, a continuation of a story that began long before we remember. The self we come to know is only the latest chapter in a narrative the body started writing on its own. In that dim, fluid world before awareness, the brain learned to pulse and respond. The heart learned to listen, and something wordless began to form a pattern of reaction, a tilt of curiosity, a rhythm of being. It is easy to think of personality as something learned, but its roots reach far deeper, into the earliest conversation between matter and mind. When the first breath finally comes, the sound of it feels like a beginning, but it isn't. It's a continuation, a brief exhalation from a being who has already spent months rehearsing what it means to exist. In that breath lies everything that came before the hormones, the neurons, the quiet shaping of individuality, and everything that will follow. From that moment on, the world will sculpt and be sculpted in return. But somewhere beneath all the learning, beneath every layer of memory and story, the original hum remains. It is the first sound of you. Inside the folds of the human brain, an invisible weather system hums quietly, shaping the landscape of every thought, every spark of emotion, every impulse to move toward or away. It isn't driven by storms or sunlight, but by a constellation of tiny messengers, molecules drifting between neurons, translating chemistry into feeling. These are the currents of personality, the unseen tides that rise and fall with every moment of joy, anxiety, curiosity, or calm. Even as you sit still, billions of microscopic exchanges are choreographing who you are in this exact instant. Dopamine is often called the molecule of pleasure, but that's only part of its story. It's less about joy and more about pursuit, the shimmering anticipation that pulls us forward. When you imagine a reward, dopamine stirs, lighting up the brain's pathways like lanterns leading into the dark. It urges you toward goals, toward discovery, toward risk. People born with naturally higher dopamine sensitivity often crave novelty and adventure. They are the explorers, restless for stimulation. Those with lower levels find comfort in routine, steady, and content within familiar patterns. Both temperaments, opposites though they seem, are written from the same biological ink. Serotonin, in contrast, is the quiet stabilizer, the chemical that smooths emotional turbulence and restores balance after the dopamine rush fades. It's the neurotransmitter of satisfaction, signaling that things are enough for now. When serotonin flows easily, life feels steady, colors seem softer, and the world feels kind. When it wanes, storms of irritability or melancholy can roll in without warning. Genetic variations in how our brains use serotonin can influence whether we are prone to worry or calm by nature. It's not destiny, but it's a foundation, one that experience can either strengthen or erode over time. Then there's oxytocin, the bond maker, released in moments of trust, touch, and connection. It floods the system during a mother's embrace, a shared laugh, or the silent comfort of being understood. Oxytocin is why a warm glance can ease pain or why loneliness feels like hunger. It links the chemistry of the body to the architecture of relationships. When it circulates freely, we feel anchored, belonging to something larger than ourselves. When it's scarce, even crowded rooms can feel empty. Personality isn't just built from how we think, but from how our chemistry teaches us to connect or to retreat. These molecules do not act alone. They dance with hundreds of others, adrenaline, endorphins, cortisol, GABA, all working together like instruments in a complex orchestra. When balanced, they create harmony, excitement followed by rest, curiosity softened by caution, connection wrapped in safety. When imbalanced, they can tip into discord too much. Dopamine can turn ambition into obsession. Too little serotonin can drain joy from simple things. Too little oxytocin can make trust feel foreign. The delicate balance between them determines not only our moods, but the emotional tones that color our lives. What's most extraordinary is how this chemistry interacts with experience. A kind word can raise oxytocin levels as effectively as a physical touch. A small success can ripple through dopamine pathways, reinforcing confidence for days. Meditation can nudge serotonin higher, rewiring the brain toward calm. Our inner chemistry is not fixed. It listens constantly to what we think, feel, and do. Every habit, every conversation, every small act of care or cruelty changes the chemical weather inside us. Personality, then, is not just who we are. It's how our biology responds to the stories we live through. Even memory is tied to these molecules. When dopamine surges, it tags experiences as important, telling the brain to remember. Serotonin helps filter which memories feel safe to revisit and which stay sealed behind emotional glass. Oxytocin turns certain moments falling in love, holding a newborn, saying goodbye into lifelong imprints, carved not only in neurons but in chemistry. Long after the details fade, the chemical echo remains, shaping what we seek and what we avoid. To understand the chemistry of perfect character is to see that emotion is not weakness, but communication. The body is constantly speaking to the mind in the language of molecules, signaling what it needs, what it fears, what it loves. Our decisions, ambitions, and relationships are not detached from this system. They are guided by it. Every burst of courage, every instinct to reach out or withdraw, every laugh or sigh begins as a molecular spark. And yet, even knowing all this, there is something ineffable that chemistry cannot fully capture. We are more than our dopamine, more than our serotonin or oxytocin. We are the way these forces converge into patterns of meaning, the way biology learns to dream. Still, beneath every word and gesture, the brain continues its ceaseless conversation in chemicals, tiny signals flickering like stars in a private sky, weaving the texture of who we are. From the moment we open our eyes, the world reflects itself back to us through the faces of others. In those first weeks of life, before we have language or memory, before we even understand what a self is, we are shaped by the gaze that meets ours. A parent's expression, the warmth or tension in a voice, the rhythm of being held. These become the first mirrors in which we begin to recognize who we are. Every coo, every sigh, every moment of silence begins to etch the blueprint of how we will one day reach for others and how we will expect them to reach back. The newborn's brain is not a finished machine, but an open field waiting to be mapped. Billions of neurons stretch out like young vines, searching for connections. Every interaction, every small flicker of emotion from the caregiver provides direction for where those connections will grow. When a baby cries and someone comes to comfort it, the brain records a pattern: distress met by safety. When a cry is met with delay or confusion, a different pattern takes root. The world responds, but not always. In homes where comfort never arrives, the nervous system learns to expect nothing and begins to build defenses instead of trust. These patterns are not conscious choices, they are cellular memories, silent lessons about what it means to be seen or unseen. Long before the word love exists in a child's mind, its essence is already understood through rhythm. The gentle sway of being rocked to sleep, the repetition of soft words, the pulse of a heartbeat against a tiny ear. These sensations become the first language of security. The infant learns that safety has a sound, a smell, a temperature. Over time, this embodied knowledge turns into something invisible yet enduring. The sense that the world is predictable, that people can be trusted, that comfort is possible. It is the invisible foundation on which every later relationship will stand. When parents or caregivers meet a baby's gaze, they are doing more than offering affection. They are teaching the child how to read emotion itself. The brain's mirror neurons, which allow us to imitate and understand others, light up in response to faces. A smile met with a smile strengthens circuits for empathy. A frown mirrored back teaches recognition of sadness. Through thousands of small exchanges, a child learns not just what others feel, but what those feelings mean about them. If the caregiver's face often brightens in response to the child's joy, the brain learns, my happiness matters. If the face turns away, neutral or distracted, another lesson forms. Perhaps my joy is too loud. These lessons are carried forward, echoed in the way we later navigate friendships, romance, and even conflict. Attachment theory describes this process as the construction of an internal working model, a mental map of how relationships function. For securely attached children, the map says, when I reach out, someone will come. For those whose early needs were met inconsistently, the map becomes more complex. Love is real, but it may vanish without warning. Others, raised in environments of neglect or chaos, develop a map that reads, it's safer not to need anyone at all. These blueprints persist into adulthood, shaping the kinds of partners we choose, how we handle distance or closeness, and how easily we forgive. We repeat what is familiar, even when it hurts, because on some deep, unspoken level, familiarity feels like safety. The mirror of experience doesn't stop with the parent. As children grow, teachers, siblings, and friends contribute to the evolving portrait of self. Praise activates the brain's reward centers, tying achievement to belonging. Criticism lights up circuits for shame and self-protection. A kind word at the right moment can literally strengthen neural pathways associated with confidence, while repeated rejection can prune them away. Each social moment leaves a trace, guiding the brain's future expectations. To be loved consistently in childhood is to carry an internal rhythm of calm that lasts decades. To be loved conditionally is to live with an undertone of vigilance, always listening for the moment when approval might disappear. Memory plays a quiet role in this process. Our earliest memories are not images or words, but sensations, warmth, sound, the feeling of being held or left alone. These impressions settle deep within the limbic system, shaping how we react to stress or tenderness later in life. When someone offers comfort as adults, our bodies remember whether such gestures were once safe. A hug can release ease for one person and tension for another, not because of who gives it, but because of the history stored beneath the skin. In this way, the past continues to live through the present, disguised as personality. As we move through childhood, we begin to mirror not only emotions, but behaviors. A child who grows up watching calm problem-solving will mimic that calm. One who witnesses anger learns to anticipate it, sometimes becoming the peacekeeper, sometimes the spark. Neural plasticity makes this imitation powerful. The brain observes, copies, and practices automatically, rehearsing patterns until they become instinct. Even when we believe we are nothing like our parents, echoes of their tone, gestures, and habits often emerge uninvited. It isn't imitation, it's inheritance through observation, a genetic melody rewritten through experience. And yet, the mirror is not destiny. The brain remains open to revision. New experiences, stable friendships, therapy, love offered without condition, can slowly reshape the internal map. Secure attachment can be learned, though it takes patience, repetition, and gentleness. Each act of trust accepted without punishment rewires the circuits that once braced for loss. Over time, the nervous system learns that safety can exist in the present, even if it did not in the past. The mirror reflects differently, and the image softens. By adulthood, these early reflections have merged into a continuous sense of self. We believe we know who we are, but much of that knowledge comes from the echoes of those first mirrors. The way we comfort others mirrors how we were comforted. The way we handle silence mirrors what silence once meant. We may think our reactions are choices, but often they are rehearsals, performed by an ancient part of the mind still trying to finish an unfinished story. Somewhere inside every adult is the child who once looked into another's eyes and searched for recognition. The patterns built in that gaze still guide us when to trust, when to pull back, when to hide, when to love. And though those early experiences cannot be erased, they can be understood. To see them clearly is to see the blueprint we've been living by, often without knowing it. In that awareness lies a quiet kind of freedom, the ability to look into a new mirror, one not made of memory, and choose perhaps for the first time how to reflect back. There is a rhythm to human connection, a tide that pulls some of us toward the noise of the crowd and others toward the quiet of solitude. Long before we had words for introversion or extroversion, these differences existed as survival strategies written into our biology. Each of us carries a unique threshold for stimulation, a point at which the world either feels alive or overwhelming. This invisible threshold, determined by brain chemistry and wiring, shapes how we seek comfort, where we find energy, and what kind of silence feels safe. At the heart of this difference lies the reticular activating system, a network in the brainstem that filters sensory information and determines how alert we are. Extroverted brains tend to have lower baseline arousal. They need more external input to reach their ideal state of focus and satisfaction. That's why crowds, conversation and activity feel invigorating rather than draining. The world fuels them. The hum of life sharpens their senses. Introverted brains, on the other hand, operate closer to the edge of overstimulation. Their neural pathways are already humming with internal activity, so too much external noise can flood the system. For them, solitude isn't escape, it's balance, a chance to reset the dial and process the world at their own pace. These differences are not matters of preference, but of physiology. Brain scans show that extroverts have stronger responses to dopamine, the neurotransmitter of reward and anticipation. Their brains light up more intensely at the promise of novelty, risk, and social interaction. The same event that feels exhilarating to one person might feel exhausting to another, not because of temperament, but because their chemistry interprets the moment differently. Introverts rely more heavily on acetylcholine, a chemical that rewards calm focus and depth of thought. It encourages sustained attention rather than constant excitement, which is why quiet environments can feel so satisfying. What one person experiences as boredom, another experiences as peace. Evolution had a reason for keeping both types in the gene pool. In ancient tribes, extroverted individuals were the scouts, the ones who ventured out to find food, trade, or form alliances. Their social energy helped communities grow and survive. Introverted individuals, meanwhile, were the observers, the keepers of detail, the ones who noticed patterns, remembered routes, and sensed danger in subtle shifts. They offered stability when others rushed ahead. Societies needed both, explorers and anchors, the outer reach and the inner route. Humanity's balance depended on that duality, and it still does. Yet our modern world often praises one rhythm over the other. Extroversion is mistaken for confidence, and introversion for withdrawal. But confidence and quiet are not opposites. Extroverts draw power from the outer world. Introverts draw it from within. When they understand their natural rhythms, each finds strength in what might once have felt. Like limitation, the extrovert learns to pause before the rush of activity consumes them. The introvert learns that solitude is not a flaw, but a kind of sanctuary. Personality isn't a fixed label on a spectrum. It's a fluid conversation between biology and context. Even the most introverted mind can feel alive in the right company, and even the most extroverted spirit can crave stillness after too much noise. Some people live in the middle ground, ambiverts, whose balance shifts with mood, environment, or time. Their adaptability is a quiet reminder that human behavior is not static, that our inner worlds breathe and bend with circumstance. Inside the brain, energy and rest form a cycle, much like waking and dreaming. Extroverts recharge through interaction, their dopamine circuits lighting up like city streets at dusk. Introverts recharge through reflection, their acetylcholine pathways deepening like forest roots after rain. Each system needs the other to complete the loop of human experience. Without connection, reflection becomes isolation. Without rest, connection becomes chaos. The dance between them is ancient and delicate, a whisper passed down through generations of minds. Sometimes, the two meet within one person. There are those who crave conversation but later feel hollow from it, who love people deeply but need silence to remember themselves afterward. They live between worlds, restless in quiet, overwhelmed in noise. These individuals embody the tension that lives in all of us, the longing to belong and the need to retreat. They remind us that solitude and togetherness are not opposites, but alternating breaths in the same body. When you watch a crowd from a distance, a concert, a marketplace, a room alive with laughter, you can almost see the chemistry at work. Some faces lean toward the light, absorbing it like warmth. Others linger at the edges, watching, listening, finding meaning in the details others overlook. Both are beautiful in their own way. The extrovert expands the world, the introvert deepens it. together, they create the balance that keeps humanity both curious and grounded. We often think of personality as a choice, as if one could simply decide to be louder or quieter, braver or calmer. But beneath those choices lies a biological melody playing softly in the background, guiding the tempo of our interactions. The secret is not to silence it, but to listen to learn the rhythm that feels like home. In doing so, we stop comparing and start understanding. In the end, introversion and extroversion are less about social preference and more about how we find equilibrium in a world that never stops moving. One seeks renewal in connection, the other in quiet reflection. Both are necessary, both are human, and both remind us that there is no single way to belong. Somewhere between the crowd and the quiet, between the hum of life and the heartbeat of solitude, each of us finds our own center, the place where the world and the self finally meet. Memory is not a recording. It is a cathedral we build, brick by invisible brick, every time we revisit the past. Inside it, light shifts, walls move, and entire rooms can appear or vanish depending on how we feel when we enter. We believe memory preserves us, but in truth, it reshapes us. Each recollection is not the moment itself, but the most recent story we told about it. Like a sculptor smoothing clay, the mind rewrites details until the past fits the shape of who we think we are now. In the brain, memory is not stored in one place, but scattered across vast networks, fragments of sight, sound, emotion, and touch woven together like threads of a tapestry. The hippocampus, deep within the temporal lobe, serves as both architect and librarian, linking these fragments into coherent patterns we can later recall. But every act of remembering is also an act of change. When we recall an event, the neural pathways that encode it temporarily open, becoming malleable, alive. The emotion we feel in that moment seeps into the memory, subtly altering its tone before it settles again. In this way, the past is continually repainted by the present. Science calls this process reconsolidation, but in the language of experience, it feels more like editing. A painful memory revisited often enough with compassion can lose its sting. A joyful one can grow more luminous with each retelling. Over time, we curate our histories, emphasizing moments that sustain our sense of meaning while fading those that do not. We are both the author and the unreliable narrator of our own lives. What we remember most vividly often says less about what happened and more about who we've become since it did. Nostalgia plays a quiet role in this architecture. It softens the edges of time, transforming ordinary recollections into emotional anchors. When we think of a childhood home, we rarely recall the exact floor plan or the chipped paint on the windowsill. Instead, we remember the light filtering through the curtains, the smell of rain on summer pavement, the laughter echoing down the hallway. Nostalgia is not the accuracy of memory, it's the warmth of it. It's the brain's way of reassuring us that life has had coherence, that joy was real, even if the details blur. This gentle rewriting serves a purpose. Without it, we would drown in the noise of all that has ever happened to us. The mind simplifies, condenses, and reinterprets to preserve psychological balance. Some experiences fade not because they're unimportant, but because remembering them would be too costly. Forgetting, in this sense, is a form of emotional architecture. It keeps the structure standing. We think of memory as something that fails us, but often it's an act of mercy. Still, the past leaves its fingerprints. Even forgotten memories can shape us through the emotions they trained into the nervous system. A scent, a chord of music, a particular shade of light can awaken a feeling we can't trace to any source. The body remembers what the mind has misplaced. Sometimes a rush of comfort, sometimes a wave of unease. These echoes are the foundation stones of identity, the emotional architecture that tells us who we are long before we can explain why. Our brains are storytellers by design. They crave narrative, seeking patterns in chaos. When the past doesn't quite fit, we revise it. We weave coherence out of contradiction, turning random events into chapters of a personal mythology. Each time we recount an old story to a friend, a partner, or ourselves, we add inflection, rearrange emphasis, polish meaning. What began as a fragment becomes folklore. And though this may seem like deception, it's the opposite. It's adaptation. We are built to transform experience into story, because story is what allows the mind to hold time without breaking under its weight. But this constant editing has a cost. Sometimes, the versions of ourselves that memory preserves can become prisons. We cling to identities rooted in selective recall, the hero, the victim, the wanderer, and forget that we are capable of being rewritten too. When we revisit the past with new understanding, we give ourselves permission to release old scripts. Memory is not fixed. It is a living architecture that can be renovated at any time. Emotion is the mortar that holds this structure together. Facts fade quickly, but feelings linger, coloring every remembered scene. The first love that broke your heart, the teacher who believed in you, the loss that changed how you breathe. These moments are stored not just in neurons, but in the body's chemistry. The adrenaline, the oxytocin, the ache in the chest, they are part of the memory itself. That's why recalling certain events can make your pulse quicken or your eyes sting. You are not merely remembering, you are reliving. In the end, the architecture of memory is both fragile and enduring. Its corridors shift, yet its essence persists. The person you were 10 years ago built rooms you still inhabit, even if you've redecorated them with new understanding. The stories you tell about your life are the scaffolding of identity, and as those stories change, so do you. Every reflection, every recollection, every quiet moment spent wandering through the past is a kind of self-construction, an ongoing act of becoming. Perhaps this is why memory feels sacred. It is the only bridge we have between who we were and who we are becoming. We live surrounded by ghosts of our own making moments, preserved, reimagined, and sometimes forgiven. The mind keeps building, one recollection at a time, shaping not just what we remember, but what we believe we are. And though the structure will never be perfect, never entirely stable, it stands nonetheless, our most intricate creation, made of light, time, and the tender gravity of forgetting. Fear is one of the oldest languages the body knows. It speaks in heartbeats, in breath held too long, in the tightening of muscles before the mind has time to form words. Long before reason evolved, fear was already our guardian, shaping the way we moved through the world. Every species that has ever lived owes its survival to that pulse of warning, a whisper from the ancient core of the brain, reminding us what is safe and what could end us. But within that same circuitry lies the seed of courage, for without fear, bravery has nothing to rise against. At the center of it all sits a small almond-shaped structure deep inside the brain, the amygdala. It is one of the oldest parts of our emotional system, a relic of the animal past that still decides in milliseconds whether something is friend or foe. When danger appears real or imagined, the amygdala flares like a spark, sending chemical signals through the body. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream, sharpening senses and speeding the heart. Pupils widen, muscles tense, and time itself seems to slow. This is the body's emergency theater, rehearsed over millions of years. It doesn't ask for permission, it simply acts. Yet fear is not a simple alarm. It is a sculptor, shaping temperament and decision. Some people live with a more sensitive amygdala, tuned to the slightest hint of threat. Their systems flare easily, painting the world in shades of caution. Others possess a quieter version, one that hesitates before calling the alarm. For them, danger feels distant, manageable, even exciting. Brain scans show that thrill seekers, skydivers, firefighters, explorers often have lower amygdala reactivity. Their threshold for fear is higher, allowing them to move through uncertainty without paralysis. To them, risk feels like focus, not terror. The same surge that makes one person panic fills another with clarity. Courage, then, is not the absence of fear, but the art of balance. It arises when the frontal cortex, the seat of reasoning, steps into conversation with the amygdala. The fear signal is heard, acknowledged, but not obeyed blindly. The prefrontal cortex evaluates context. Is this danger real, or is it memory pretending to be the present? In that split second of dialogue between instinct and thought, bravery is born. It is the space where biology meets choice. For early humans, this balance was the line between life and death. Too little fear, and one might walk too close to a predator. Too much, and one might never leave the cave. Evolution favored both the cautious who preserved the group and the bold who expanded its boundaries. Each survival strategy carried its own wisdom. Those drawn to risk discovered new lands, hunted bigger prey, and adapted faster to change. Those guided by vigilance kept the fires burning and the children safe. Together, they formed the spectrum of human courage, one end rooted in caution, the other in curiosity. Fear also has memory. Once the amygdala has sounded the alarm, it remembers. A single traumatic moment can brand the nervous system, encoding a pattern that may outlast the event itself. A sound, a scent, a flicker of light can later awaken the same cascade of hormones as the original danger. This is how phobias and anxiety form echoes of fear that never quite fade. But just as fear can be learned, it can also be unlearned. Through repetition and safety, the brain rewrites its script, slowly teaching the amygdala that not every shadow means harm. Courage is this process made visible, the gradual reprogramming of instinct through experience. The chemistry of risk is intoxicating. When we face fear and survive, the brain rewards us with dopamine and endorphins, a euphoric cocktail that reinforces bravery. It's why some people crave danger not out of recklessness, but because their biology translates risk into exhilaration. The edge of fear becomes a frontier of discovery. Others find that same reward in quieter victories: public speaking, honesty, vulnerability, love. Each requires the same neurological choreography: fear, response, and release. What differs is the scale of the challenge, not the process itself. There is beauty in the way fear refines courage. Every trembling hand, every racing heart is proof that the system is alive and working. Courage is not calmness, it is trembling forward anyway. To face fear is to teach the brain that safety can exist, even in uncertainty. This lesson ripples outward, altering how we handle all kinds of risk: emotional, social, creative. The artist who shows their work, the parent who lets their child go, the scientist who dares to question consensus, all are performing the same ancient ritual of overcoming. Still, fear does not always tell the truth. Sometimes the amygdala mistakes imagination for evidence, responding to threats that exist only in thought. The body panics at possibilities, not realities. Modern life, with its endless information and invisible dangers, can overstimulate these circuits, leaving us in a constant state of mild alarm. Learning to soothe this reflex, to slow the breath, to name the feeling, is not weakness, but mastery. It is the deliberate act of returning to balance, reminding the amygdala that not every unknown is a predator. Courage, in its purest form, is not loud. It's the quiet recalibration of the nervous system after fear has done its work. It's the deep exhale after panic, the slow step into the uncertain, the willingness to meet life on its own terms. Some of the bravest acts happen in silence: getting out of bed on a hard morning, speaking truth when it trembles in your throat, staying soft when the world demands armor. These are the moments when biology yields to will, When evolution's oldest reflex bows to consciousness, fear will never disappear. It is stitched into our DNA, humming beneath every thought and heartbeat. But it does not. You have to rule us. It can be a companion rather than an enemy, a reminder of what matters most. For in every pulse of fear lies the same message. Something precious is at stake. And in answering that message not by turning away, but by stepping forward, we remember what it means to be alive. Empathy begins long before we learn the word for it. It starts in the quiet spaces between people, in the glance that meets another's eyes, in the heartbeat that unconsciously synchronizes with a voice we trust. It is the invisible current that passes between minds, binding us in ways we rarely notice but always feel. At its simplest, empathy is the ability to sense what another person feels. At its deepest, it is the collapse of separation, a temporary merging of inner worlds. We like to think of it as kindness, but biologically, it is something far older, a reflex of survival written into our neurons, reminding us that no one truly thrives alone. Hidden within the folds of the brain is a network designed for connection. When we see someone smile, certain cells in our premotor cortex fire as if we were smiling ourselves. When someone stumbles, the same regions that register pain in our own body flare to life. These are the mirror neurons, discovered in the brains of primates but found to echo across our species. They are the foundation of imitation, learning, and shared emotion. They allow us to feel the world not only through our own skin, but through the experiences of others. To witness another's joy or suffering is, in a very real way, to feel a shadow of it inside ourselves. This mirroring once helped our ancestors survive. To sense fear in another's eyes before danger arrived gave the group time to run. To read exhaustion in a companion's movements guided the rhythm of a hunt. Even compassion, the gentler cousin of fear, carried evolutionary weight. Caring for the injured or the young increased the tribe's chances of endurance. Over time, empathy became not just a tool for safety, but the fabric of culture itself. It wove language, cooperation, and love into the human story, each act of understanding deepening the bridge between one mind and another. When we comfort someone in pain, our brains release oxytocin, the same chemical that strengthens the bond between mother and child. This hormone softens the edges of self-protection, encouraging trust and intimacy. It lowers cortisol, easing the body's stress response, and even slows the heart. Empathy, in this sense, is medicine not only for the receiver, but for the giver as well. To connect with another's humanity activates the same reward centers as food or music. We are, quite literally, wired to find pleasure in kindness. But empathy is not always gentle. It can cut both ways. When we open ourselves too wide, we risk drowning in the emotions of others. Psychologists call it empathic distress, the point at which compassion becomes pain. The mirror neurons that once guided care begin to overfire, confusing another's suffering with our own. Nurses, therapists, and caregivers know this intimately. The body absorbs the anguish it witnesses until it begins to fray. To survive, some people learn to build small walls to feel, but not fully. These boundaries are not cruelty. They are balance, the thin line between connection and collapse. Even on a global scale, empathy fluctuates. The human mind was designed to feel deeply for those within reach for family, tribe, and community. But in an interconnected world, where the suffering of strangers streams constantly through screens, our circuits can become overwhelmed. When every tragedy becomes visible, empathy sometimes retreats into numbness. The brain, faced with too much pain it cannot act upon, protects itself through indifference. Yet even this detachment carries its own sadness, a quiet guilt at the edges of awareness. We were built to feel, and to stop feeling entirely is its own form of loss. Empathy is also shaped by experience. People raised in environments where emotions were mirrored accurately, where sadness met comfort and anger met understanding, tend to develop stronger empathic awareness. Their brains learned early that emotion is safe to share. Others, whose feelings were ignored or punished, may find empathy more complicated. Their mirror systems still function, but the pathways of trust around them are scarred. To feel another's pain can awaken the echo of one's own unhealed wounds. In this way, empathy can be both bridge and mirror, connecting us while also revealing the fractures we carry inside. There is a subtle rhythm to empathy's expression. It requires not only feeling but presence, a willingness to listen without the impulse to fix. True empathy is not about taking away someone's pain, but about standing beside it, steady and unafraid. It is a form of emotional resonance, like two tuning forks vibrating in sympathy. The sound doesn't cancel, it harmonizes. In that harmony, isolation dissolves. Pain shared becomes more bearable, not because it vanishes, but because it is finally seen. Neuroscientists have found that meditation and mindfulness can deepen empathy by strengthening the anterior insula and anterior cingulate cortex regions tied to awareness of both self and others. These practices quiet the mind's chatter long enough for the subtle signals of another's experience to be felt clearly, yet they also build resilience, preventing the burnout of over-identification. The paradox of empathy is that to feel deeply, one must remain anchored within oneself. Without that center, compassion turns into exhaustion. With it, empathy becomes endurance, the ability to keep the heart open without being consumed. There are moments when empathy reaches beyond biology, touching something almost spiritual. In times of collective grief or joy, mass ceremonies, protests, celebrations, human emotion synchronizes on a grand scale. Heart rates align, voices merge, tears rise in unison. The body forgets where it ends, and the world begins. In those moments, empathy becomes transcendence, a glimpse of what it means to belong utterly. We are individuals, yes, but also participants in a shared consciousness that flickers to life whenever one person truly feels another. And yet, the real work of empathy often happens in the smallest exchanges. A hand resting on another's shoulder, a pause before responding, the simple act of listening without judgment. These gestures ripple outward in ways we cannot measure. A single moment of understanding can alter the chemical weather of another person's day, shifting the balance of loneliness and hope. Every act of empathy, no matter how small, reaffirms the hidden truth that we are bound together by invisible threads of feeling. To live without empathy would be to live without reflection, to move through life surrounded by mirrors that never answer back. To live with it is to accept a certain vulnerability, a porousness of being, but it is also to touch the heart of what makes us human. Empathy reminds us that our minds are not separate islands, but parts of the same ocean, rising and falling in shared tides. And though the waves can be overwhelming at times, they carry within them the very thing that keeps us alive, the capacity to see ourselves in another's eyes and to know that we are not alone. Every day, without quite realizing it, we assemble ourselves. A tone of voice for work, a posture for strangers, a softness reserved for those we love. We adjust and adapt, shifting our words, our expressions, our energy, as if fitting the shape of the moment around us. Some call it pretending, others call it survival. But beneath these shifting versions lies a single truth. We are creatures of context, designed to mirror the world in order to belong to it. The ancient Greeks had a word for this, the persona, meaning mask. It didn't imply deceit. The mask was how an actor's voice carried through the amphitheater, a tool for expression rather than concealment. The modern self works the same way. The personas we wear are not lies. They are amplifiers, crafted to project certain truths and protect others. They help us navigate the complexity of social life, to be seen and accepted without exposing every fragile part of what lies underneath. The human brain is exquisitely tuned for this balancing act. Deep in the limbic system, the amygdala monitors social cues for approval or rejection. When we sense acceptance, the brain releases oxytocin and dopamine, rewarding connection. When we sense disapproval, cortisol rises, urging us to adjust. This feedback loop guides behavior, teaching us which masks fit best in which environments. A child learns quickly when to be quiet, when to smile, when to speak. An adult refines that skill into charisma, professionalism, or charm. Each mask becomes a social technology, a way to translate the inner self into a language others can understand. But the masks we wear do more than protect us. They also shape us. When we behave in a certain way long enough, the brain begins to integrate that behavior into identity. This is why the idea of fake it till you make it sometimes works. Acting confident triggers the physiological patterns of confidence. Slower breathing, open posture, steady tone. These physical cues send signals back to the brain, subtly altering mood and belief. Over time, the performance becomes self-fulfilling. The mask molds the face. What began as imitation becomes embodiment. And yet, there is a cost to constant performance. When every interaction demands a different version of self, exhaustion creeps in. The mind begins to lose track of what is genuine and what is adaptation. This is the quiet ache behind social fatigue, the effort of maintaining coherence while shifting shapes. The psychologist Carl Jung warned that identification with the persona can lead to alienation, a state where we believe the mask more than the self beneath it. In such moments, authenticity feels like a distant country, half remembered but unreachable. Authenticity itself is not the absence of masks, but the awareness of them. It is knowing when to remove them, when to loosen their grip, and when to let them speak for us. We are not meant to live maskless. Complete transparency is as unbearable as complete concealment. The healthiest selves are flexible ones, able to move between personas without forgetting their center. This adaptability is not deception, it is empathy. To modulate our expression for others is to acknowledge their perspective, to build bridges instead of walls. The danger lies only in forgetting that the bridge has two ends, one reaching outward, the other leading back home. Our personas often arise from longing. The shy child who learns to joke becomes the adult who eases tension with humor. The uncertain young professional who imitates confidence becomes the leader who truly embodies it. Masks are, in this sense, creative acts. They allow us to experiment with possibility, to test versions of ourselves before fully inhabiting them. Growth requires this kind of play. Pretending is sometimes the first step toward becoming, but when the pretending never stops, when it becomes armor rather than experiment, the self begins to disappear beneath its own invention. In social life, we are constantly reading and being read. We tailor our presence to fit the expectations of those around us, guided by cues often too subtle to notice. The lift of an eyebrow, the pause in a sentence, the warmth in a tone, each signal shapes our behavior. The frontal lobes of the brain handle this dance, adjusting our responses in real time. This ability, known as self-monitoring, varies from person to person. Those who are high in it glide easily through different settings, adapting like water. Those who are low in it resist performance, clinging fiercely to a single version of truth. Both have beauty, the chameleon's grace and the oak's steadfastness, but both can falter when taken to extremes. One risks losing shape, the other risks breaking instead of bending. Modern life complicates the equation further. Social media multiplies our masks, asking us to curate identities not just for one room, but for thousands of invisible audiences. We become performers in perpetual motion, caught between authenticity and expectation. The digital self is often a highlight reel of who we wish to be, yet even that projection feeds back into identity. When others respond to the version we show, our brain registers real reward. The illusion becomes another layer of truth. Still, beneath the layers of performance, something constant persists, the self that watches, the quiet awareness that recognizes the shift from one mask to another. It is that awareness that allows us to step back and breathe, to ask which masks still serve us and which we've outgrown. Perhaps authenticity is not a single, unchanging state, but a rhythm, the gentle oscillation between who we are, who we need to be, and who we are becoming. In the end, the masks we wear are not prisons, but mirrors. They show us the selves we've tried on, the ones we've outlived, and the ones still waiting to be discovered. Every act of adaptation, every performance, every moment of vulnerability hidden behind a practiced smile is part of the same human project, the lifelong attempt to belong without disappearing. And if we are lucky, with time, the masks begin to fit more comfortably, not because we've learned to pretend better, but because we've grown closer to the truth that was always underneath. We like to believe that we are consistent, that the person we were 10 years ago still lives somewhere inside us, unbroken, steady, familiar. We carry that belief like a compass, a way to make sense of time. But the truth is softer and stranger. The self is not a fixed point, but a current, and every experience, every season of life subtly changes its direction. The face in the mirror remains recognizable, but behind the eyes, the architecture of the mind is in constant renovation. Each day, our brains remake themselves. New neurons grow, old connections fade, and pathways shift in response to what we learn, what we fear, and what we love. This phenomenon, neuroplasticity, is the quiet heartbeat of transformation. It allows us to adapt, to recover, to evolve. When a memory repeats, the circuits that carry it strengthen. When a skill goes unused, the neurons that support it wither away, making room for new growth. In this endless cycle of construction and decay, the personality too is rewritten. The beliefs we once defended with conviction soften. Habits dissolve. Desires change shape. Even the voice of our inner dialogue ages with us, adjusting its tone to match what life has taught. The illusion of consistency comes from memory. Memory stitches together fragments of who we have been into a story that feels seamless. It fills the gaps between versions of ourselves so the transitions appear smooth. But beneath the narrative, the shifts are profound. The brain you wake up with at 40 is not the same one you had at 20. It has been rewired by heartbreak, repetition, joy, grief, and countless small choices you no longer remember making. The continuity we feel is an act of storytelling, a masterpiece of the mind's need for coherence. Change begins at the molecular level. Hormones fluctuate, reshaping emotion and energy. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision and judgment, continues to mature well into the late 20s, refining impulse into perspective. Later, as the body ages, dopamine levels decline, reducing the thrill of novelty and increasing appreciation for stability. What once excited us may begin to exhaust us. The risk that once felt vital becomes unnecessary noise. Aging does not erase the self, it distills it, sanding away excess until only what matters most remains. But even that refinement is not final. Under stress, trauma, or revelation, personality can shift again, recalibrating to survive. Circumstances act as sculptors. A shy person thrust into leadership learns confidence through necessity. A dreamer hardened by responsibility learns to value order. Environments change the brain as surely as emotion does, etching new grooves into behavior. Culture, relationships, and time each leave their mark, pressing us into shapes we could not have imagined. The version of ourselves that laughs easily in one setting might grow silent in another. We do not simply act differently in new environments. we become different, our chemistry and neural patterns adapting to the demands of the moment. Still, there is something within us that feels continuous, a thread running through the years. Psychologists call it the narrative self, the storyteller that binds our scattered experiences into meaning. It is the voice that insists there has always been a you, even as every cell in your body has been replaced. This continuity is comforting, but it is also deceptive. The mind edits the past to fit the present, erasing contradictions, smoothing over inconsistency. We forget not just facts, but feelings. The intensity of old fears, the sweetness of old ambitions, so that our present identity can feel stable. The story of self is less a record and more a sculpture constantly being reshaped. Personality tests and labels promise certainty, but even they falter under time's influence. The introvert may grow into an ambivert after years of love and work that demand presence. The idealist may evolve into a realist after too many disappointments. Studies following people across decades reveal that traits once considered stable, like conscientiousness or openness, shift subtly with life stages. We grow more patient, less volatile, more self-assured. And yet, despite these changes, when asked, most people feel they have always been the same person. This paradox, change without awareness, is the quiet magic of the human mind. The myth of consistency offers comfort because it protects identity from chaos. If we accepted how fluid we truly are, life might feel disorienting, but change does not erase us. It refines our capacity to adapt. Think of a river. Its water is never the same, yet its course is recognizable. Its bends, its depth, its music remain. The self is that river ever flowing, always moving through new landscapes, carrying traces of every place it has been. There are moments, though, when the illusion breaks. We encounter an old journal, hear a recording of our younger voice, meet someone who remembers us differently. The distance between then and now can feel startling. How could we have thought that way, loved that way, feared that way? But the answer is simple. The person who lived those moments no longer exists. Their memories live in us, their lessons linger, but we are the continuation, not the repetition. Every past self contributes to the mosaic of the present one, and yet none of them hold final authority. Even within a single lifetime, the brain's ability to rewire means transformation remains possible. People recover from trauma, learn empathy where once there was anger, find peace after decades of restlessness. Change is not betrayal of the past, it is proof that the mind is alive. The same neurons that once fueled anxiety can, through time and attention, grow pathways for calm. The same energy that drove recklessness can evolve into curiosity or courage. Our personalities are not cages. They are ecosystems, shifting with the weather of experience. Perhaps what we call the true self is not a single version frozen in time, but the continuity of growth itself. The awareness that endures even as the content changes. The child, the dreamer, the realist, the elder, all are chapters in one expanding consciousness. Consistency is not sameness. It is the rhythm of evolution, the quiet persistence of adaptation. We are not meant to stay the same. To live is to rewrite the script over and over, to shed what no longer fits, to become fluent in change. The myth of consistency comforts us with the illusion of permanence, but life is written in motion. And if we learn to see our shifting selves not as evidence of instability, but as proof of resilience, then change stops being frightening. It becomes sacred, the endless art of becoming, over and over again, within the same skin. Personality is often thought of as something that lives entirely in the mind, a constellation of thoughts, values, and memories orbiting somewhere behind the eyes. But beneath every impulse and mood, beneath confidence or anxiety or calm, there is a body quietly conducting the rhythm of who we are. Our physical systems, the heart, the gut, The endocrine glands do not merely react to personality, they help create it. Every emotion begins as a bodily event, a chemical shift that ripples upward into feeling and thought. The body is not the stage on which personality performs. It is the orchestra. Posture, for instance, speaks before words do. The angle of the shoulders, the openness of the chest, the tilt of the head all communicate something not only to others, but to the self. When we slump, the lungs compress slightly, altering oxygen flow and subtly lowering energy. The brain reads this as fatigue or even defeat, adjusting mood and perception to match. When we stand tall, the expanded chest increases oxygen intake, stimulating the vagus nerve and shifting the balance of hormones toward alertness and confidence. This is why power posing can, for a time, make us feel bolder. The body signals to the mind that it is ready to act, and the mind believes it. Hormones form another layer of influence, sculpting temperament from the inside out. Testosterone and estrogen, often reduced to symbols of masculinity and femininity, play far more nuanced roles in shaping how we respond to challenge, risk, and connection. Higher testosterone levels are linked to assertiveness and dominance, but also to focus and drive. Estrogen enhances sensitivity to social cues and emotional nuance, increasing empathy and intuition. Both exist in every body, their ratios fluctuating with time, stress, and environment. Cortisol, the stress hormone, rises with uncertainty and pressure, narrowing attention and priming us for threat. Oxytocin, by contrast, softens the edges, encouraging trust and belonging. Each chemical creates its own emotional climate, and within that climate, the self unfolds. Even the heart has a personality of its own. The pattern of our heartbeats, the subtle variation between one pulse and the next, reveals how well our nervous system adapts to stress. A healthy heart does not beat like a metronome. It dances. This variability, called heart rate variability or HRV, measures the flexibility of the body's response to life. People with higher HRV tend to be calmer under pressure, better able to recover from emotional upsets. Their parasympathetic nervous system, the body's brake pedal, engages easily, guiding them back toward balance. Lower HRV often accompanies anxiety or irritability, the nervous system stuck in overdrive, braced against a world it expects to hurt. The heart, in this way, keeps a record of how we meet experience, with openness or with tension, with resilience or with resistance. Then there is the gut, the body's second brain. Within its winding labyrinth live trillions of bacteria, each contributing to digestion, immunity, and even mood. This microbiome produces neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, the same chemicals that shape emotion in the brain. When the balance of these microbes shifts, so does the balance of our feelings. Studies show that certain bacterial strains can reduce anxiety in mice, while others heighten it. In humans, changes in diet or antibiotics can alter emotional tone within days. The gut and brain are linked by the vagus nerve, a two-way channel through which emotion and digestion constantly converse. A knot in the stomach before a difficult conversation, a loss of appetite under stress, the sudden calm after a meal, all are the body's ways of translating feeling into biology and back again. The immune system, too, whispers into personality. Inflammation, often caused by stress, infection, or poor sleep, releases cytokines, molecules that affect mood and cognition. Elevated inflammation can dull motivation and increase irritability, producing what doctors call sickness behavior. It's the body's ancient strategy for conserving energy during illness, but when triggered chronically, it can feel like depression. The immune system and the psyche mirror each other, one flaring up when the other is overwhelmed. We are, quite literally, what we feel. Even our senses influence the way we move through the world. People with more sensitive nervous systems experience the environment in sharper focus. Lights brighter, sounds louder, textures more vivid. Their brains filter less, taking in more data from every moment. This heightened sensitivity can foster creativity and empathy, but also exhaustion. Others, with lower sensory reactivity, move through life with steadier calm, requiring stronger stimulation to feel excitement. The difference is not a choice, it is wiring, the tempo at which the body interprets existence. Across all these systems, the hormones, the heartbeat, the gut, the posture, a single truth emerges. Personality is a conversation between flesh and thought. The mind does not sit atop the body like a commander giving orders. It listens, constantly, to signals rising from below. A racing heart can trigger fear before the mind finds a reason. A relaxed breath can convince the brain that all is well. What we call mood is often the mind's interpretation of what the body already knows. Yet the body is not destiny. The same plasticity that allows the brain to change also belongs to the rest of us. Exercise increases serotonin and dopamine, reshaping emotional tone. Breathwork and meditation slow the heart, raising HRV and training resilience. Diet shifts the microbiome, which in turn reshapes the chemistry of calm. Even posture, practiced over time, can reprogram confidence. The body, once understood, becomes not just the foundation of personality but its instrument. Still, there is mystery in the way biology translates into being. Two people may share similar chemistry and yet express it in entirely different ways, one turning adrenaline into adventure, the other into anxiety. The same elevated oxytocin that fuels love can also breed jealousy. The same cortisol that fuels drive can spiral into burnout. The body offers the palette, but experience paints the portrait. Personality emerges from this meeting point, where biology and story intertwine. To know ourselves, then, is to listen inward as well as think outward. It is to notice how breath shortens in conflict, how shoulders rise with worry, how a meal or a heartbeat can shift the entire day's tone. The body remembers, even when the mind forgets. It stores our histories in muscle, hormone, rhythm, and cell, translating the abstract into the tangible. We spend our lives trying to understand who we are, but much of the answer beats quietly beneath the skin. The warmth in a gesture, the steadiness of a gaze, the way we move through space, all are reflections of the body's hidden language. To change personality, even slightly, is to change this dialogue. To breathe deeper, to move differently, to listen more kindly to the physical self that has carried us through every chapter of becoming. For in the end, who we are is not just written in thoughts and memories, but in pulse, posture, and the unseen harmony between body and mind. Each night, as consciousness drifts and the waking world dissolves, we enter a realm where logic softens and the self rearranges. Dreams are the theater of the hidden mind, a place where memory, instinct, and imagination intertwine to speak in symbols rather than words. Within their strange narratives, the unconscious reveals itself not in clear statements, but in metaphor, stitching together fragments of experience to show us what we cannot yet admit in daylight. We call them dreams, but they are really messages in motion, the psyche's attempt to balance what life leaves unresolved. The dreaming brain is alive with activity. During REM sleep, the limbic system, the seat of emotion, flares like a signal fire, while the prefrontal cortex, home of reason and control, grows quiet. The result is a landscape ruled by feeling rather than logic. Time folds, identity shifts, and emotion becomes the main character. A single sensation, fear, longing, guilt, desire, can sculpt an entire dream's world. The mind, freed from the rules of the waking self, begins to play. It experiments with alternate outcomes, revisits wounds, and tests possibilities. In this way, dreams function as emotional rehearsal. The brain simulates scenarios to prepare for future challenges or to release tension from the past. Freud called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. But modern neuroscience adds another layer. They are also the body's form of emotional maintenance. When we dream, the amygdala processes recent experiences, weaving them into older memories. This act of integration prevents emotion from stagnating. Nightmares, for example, often arise when stress overwhelms this process, when the mind struggles to digest what it has been forced to swallow. Yet even nightmares serve a purpose. They allow the nervous system to confront fear in symbolic form, safely rehearsing danger so that, upon waking, we might face reality with steadier hands. The characters who populate our dreams are rarely strangers. They are composite beings, sculpted from familiar faces and the fragments of ourselves we've ignored. The friend who betrays us in a dream may represent not them, but a part of our own mind wrestling with doubt. The lover who vanishes mid-sentence may be our longing for intimacy or our fear of it. The language of dreams is poetry. Not prose, it speaks in gesture, transformation, and mood. Decoding them is less about interpretation than intuition. We must feel their meaning rather than reason it. Beneath this nightly theater lies the deeper terrain of the shadow self, the hidden counterpart that carries everything we repress or deny. It is the part of us that hungers for what we forbid, that feels what we cannot express, that remembers what we'd rather forget. The shadow is not evil. It is simply the unacknowledged. When left unexamined, it leaks into behavior, shaping our fears and judgments in secret. But in dreams, the shadow steps forward without shame. It appears as the enemy, the stranger, the monster chasing us down endless corridors. Each terrifying face is a mirror, reflecting something within us that asks to be seen. The moment we turn to face it, when we stop running in the dream, the pursuit ends. Recognition transforms fear into understanding. Imagination itself is born from this same source. It is the daylight extension of dreaming, the mind's way of weaving possibility out of memory. Every creative act, from painting to problem solving, is a kind of waking dream, an encounter between the conscious and the unconscious. When we imagine, the brain activates many of the same regions used during REM sleep. The visual cortex lights up, emotional centers stir, and the default mode network, the system that creates our sense of identity, loosens its grip. This loosening allows ideas to merge and recombine in new ways. Imagination, like dreaming, dissolves boundaries, allowing the self to expand beyond its usual shape. Through imagination, we practice empathy. We slip into other lives, other minds, and glimpse the world through their eyes. This is why stories matter. When we read or watch fiction, our mirror neurons activate as if we were living the events ourselves. The brain rehearses emotions and choices it might never encounter otherwise. Imagination broadens the map of the possible, preparing us for experiences not yet lived. It is both a rehearsal and a revelation, a way of exploring not only what might happen, but who we might become. Still, imagination and the shadow are inseparable twins. The same faculty that allows us to dream up art and empathy can also conjure fear and obsession. The mind that envisions beauty can just as vividly imagine disaster. This duality is what makes imagination powerful and dangerous. It can trap us in cycles of worry or liberate us into creativity. The difference lies in awareness, whether we are being led by our imagination or leading it. To imagine consciously is to collaborate with the unconscious, to let its symbols guide without letting them rule. Dreams remind us that personality is not a fixed mask, but a moving constellation of selves, some awake, others sleeping. The dreamer within us holds wisdom that logic overlooks. It knows that fear can be softened through vision, that desire can find language in image, that the self is always more fluid than we believe. In dreams, we meet versions of ourselves we would never recognize in daylight. The brave one, the cruel one, the grieving one, the child still waiting for comfort. Each carries a message. Remember me, include me, make me whole again. When we wake, most dreams fade quickly, dissolving like breath on glass. Yet something lingers, a residue of emotion, a whisper of insight. The mind has done its work in the dark, sorting, healing, preparing. We rise with a slightly different architecture than the day before, though we may not feel it. Every dream leaves a fingerprint on the soul, shaping the subtle texture of who we are. Perhaps that is the true purpose of dreaming, not to escape reality, but to return to it more complete. The unconscious paints, the imagination interprets, and the waking self steps into the day carrying their work within its bones. Somewhere in that unseen collaboration, between light and shadow, between what we know and what we dare to imagine, the personality keeps evolving, half built from waking thought, half from the language of dreams. Deception is as old as language. Long before words were written, before laws or codes of honor existed, survival depended on the ability to hide intention. A creature that could mask its weakness or feign strength had a better chance of living to see another dawn. In this way, lying began not as immorality, but as adaptation. And though our world has evolved beyond the primal struggle for survival, the instinct remains. We still lie, but not only to others. Often, the most delicate and persistent lies are the ones we tell ourselves. Every mind carries within it a fragile balance between truth and comfort. To live in complete honesty would mean facing every contradiction, every flaw, every memory we wish we could rewrite. The psyche, built to maintain coherence, softens reality where it threatens to fracture us. It edits, blurs, reframes. This is not weakness, but necessity. The self, after all, is a story, a narrative stitched from memory and interpretation. And like all good stories, it depends on selective truth. At the center of this process lies a phenomenon psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the discomfort that arises when our actions conflict with our beliefs, when we do something that contradicts our sense of who we are, when the generous person acts selfishly, or the honest person deceives, we feel the mind's subtle alarm. But rather than change the behavior, we often rewrite the belief. We tell ourselves that the lie was harmless, the greed justified, the silence merciful. This mental sleight of hand restores balance. The contradiction fades, and the story of the self remains intact. These small fictions are not always malicious. In many cases, they protect us. The woman who stays in an unfulfilling relationship may convince herself that love still lingers, not out of foolishness, but because the alternative, the loss of shared years and identity, is too painful to face. The man who blames circumstance for his failures may not be avoiding accountability, but despair. To accept that he alone stood in his own way might be more than his sense of self can bear. Our deceptions are often acts of emotional triage, cushioning the impact of truth until we are ready to face it. Memory itself conspires in this quiet deception. It does not record events as they happened, but as they felt, tinted by emotion and time. The hippocampus retrieves memories like a painter, not an archivist, reapplying color each time the image is recalled. Painful moments fade, details blur, motives are rewritten until the story seems gentler. What we call nostalgia is, in many ways, the mind's most elegant lie, a soft focus applied to the past to make its edges bearable. But self-deception can also harden into armor. When we cling too tightly to the stories that protect us, truth becomes the enemy. Entire belief systems can grow from this need for coherence. We defend them passionately, because to lose them would mean losing the foundation of identity itself. This is why arguments rarely change minds. Facts threaten the narrative structure of the self, and the mind resists dismantling its own architecture. It is safer to bend reality than rebuild it. And yet, there is beauty in the mind's ability to rewrite. Every illusion it crafts serves a purpose: to preserve hope, to maintain continuity, to allow movement through pain. Children who grow up in chaos often learn to reinterpret danger as normalcy, not because they are naive, but because they must in order to function. These distortions may persist into adulthood, but they once served as lifelines. Even the lies that wound us began, at some point, as attempts to survive. We lie, too, for connection. Politeness is a form of deception softened by kindness. We say we are fine when we are not, tell small compliments to ease discomfort, conceal irritation to keep peace. These social lies lubricate the machinery of civilization. Absolute honesty, though noble in theory, would strip life of gentleness. The truth without empathy can bruise as deeply as deceit. In this sense, our willingness to hide small truths is also a gesture of care, a quiet recognition of the fragile balance between honesty and harmony. The darker side of deception emerges when we begin to believe our own inventions. The ego, that vigilant guardian of identity, is skilled at self-justification. It reframes cruelty as self-defense, selfishness as necessity, cowardice as prudence. In doing so, it protects our image of ourselves as good, moral, consistent beings. But every justification deepens the distance between who we are and who we imagine ourselves to be. Over time, that distance becomes loneliness, the subtle sense that something inside has grown dishonest, even if we cannot name what it is. Confronting these lies is not simple, because they are not written in words but woven into perception. They exist in the small pauses between thought and feeling, in the justifications that rise unbidden. To see them clearly requires a rare courage, the willingness to look at oneself without defense. Those who do often describe it as both painful and freeing. The moment we stop insisting on being right, we begin to become real. Still, complete honesty is impossible. The mind is not a transparent glass but a prism, bending light into meaning. We are shaped by illusions of permanence, of control, of importance. Without them, the vastness of existence might crush us. Our fictions give structure to chaos, turning the rawness of life into something livable. The art, perhaps, lies not in eliminating deception, but in understanding it. To know which lies sustain us and which imprison us. There is a strange mercy in the fact that truth can wait. The mind reveals it gradually, as we grow capable of bearing it. What once had to be softened by denial can, with time, be faced in clarity. The story of the self adjusts again, this time closer to honesty. Every confrontation with truth peels away a layer of illusion, leaving something simpler, humbler, more alive. In the end, deception is not a flaw in human nature. It is part of its design. We are storytellers by biology, and stories demand perspective. They bend reality to reveal meaning. The same imagination that allows us to lie is what allows us to dream, to love, to hope. Perhaps we deceive not because we reject truth, but because we are still learning how to hold it. And when, for brief moments, we can face the mirror without distortion, the reflection looking back is not pure or perfect, but it is finally whole. Deep inside every human psyche, beneath the layers of kindness and civility, there exists a set of ancient instincts, the darker emotions that whisper of dominance, cunning, and self-preservation. Psychologists call their extremes the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These words often sound like diagnoses of evil, the vocabulary of villains and abusers. But the truth is more intricate. These traits, in milder forms, live in all of us. They are not moral defects, but evolutionary echoes, tools once meant to keep us alive in a world that demanded both cooperation and control. Narcissism, at its core, is the need to be seen. It is the craving for validation that once ensured belonging, for to be ignored in an ancient tribe was to risk exile. A spark of narcissism drives us to achieve, to refine ourselves, to believe we matter. It is only when the spark becomes a wildfire, when admiration replaces empathy, that it consumes the relationships meant to sustain it. Yet even in its destructive form, it reveals something fundamentally human: the fear of insignificance. Beneath every inflated ego lies a fragile pulse, whispering, "Please don't forget me." Machiavellianism is the art of strategy, the ability to read others and bend circumstance to advantage. In its healthiest state, it manifests as social intelligence, foresight, the wisdom to navigate power without being destroyed by it. Our ancestors needed this skill to survive the politics of tribes and families, where alliances and betrayals determined who ate and who starved. But when stripped of empathy, Machiavellianism curdles into manipulation, a cold calculation that treats people as pieces on a board. Its brilliance becomes sterile, its victories hollow. Yet it too began as adaptation, proof that understanding others, even for selfish ends, requires attention and awareness. Psychopathy, the third and most feared, stems from fearlessness itself. It is the muted hum of the amygdala that keeps the body calm when others would panic. In small doses, it produces surgeons, soldiers, rescuers, people who can face danger without flinching. But when that calmness deepens into emotional numbness, conscience fades, empathy is silenced. The psychopath acts without remorse, guided only by impulse or thrill. What terrifies us about psychopathy is not its strangeness, but its reflection of what happens when emotion loses its anchor entirely. It is instinct without inhibition, power without compassion. These traits, though shadowed, are not random flaws. They form a continuum that runs through humanity itself. The assertiveness of narcissism helps us claim space in a crowded world. The calculation of Machiavellianism helps us read motives and protect ourselves. The steadiness of psychopathy grants composure when chaos rises. The problem begins not with their presence, but with imbalance, with forgetting that darkness, untempered, devours its own purpose. Evolution never demanded saints, it demanded survivors, and survival required both light and shadow. Within each of us, these darker impulses exist in quiet tension with empathy, conscience, and love. The light within the capacity for compassion and connection does not erase the shadow, it integrates it. To deny the existence of our darker traits is to risk being ruled by them unconsciously. To acknowledge them is to gain power over their influence. Self-awareness transforms instinct into wisdom, allowing strength to coexist with sensitivity. The world has always needed both the protectors who feel deeply and the ones who can act when feeling would paralyze others. Civilization itself is a fragile negotiation between these poles, a truce between mercy and power. The task of every life is not to eliminate the darkness, but to understand its origin and guide its energy toward creation rather than harm. The dark triad, when seen through this lens, becomes less a map of pathology and more a reminder of our complexity. Each of us carries the potential for arrogance, manipulation, and coldness, but also the grace to transform them into confidence, strategy, and courage. The light within does not exist in spite of the darkness, but because of it. Every shadow, after all, is proof that light still burns. Love begins long before the first glance or touch. It begins in infancy, in the warmth of a caregiver's arms, in the rhythm of a heartbeat pressed close to ours. Every future attachment grows from those early patterns of safety or distance. The brain, still forming, learns what connection feels like, whether love is predictable or dangerous, whether comfort can be trusted or must be earned. Those lessons settle deep in the nervous system, shaping how we will later hold, fear, or chase love as adults. We like to think that romance begins with choice, but much of it begins with memory, an emotional template written before we knew what words were. The science of attachment describes 3 broad patterns. The secure feel grounded in connection. They can love without losing themselves. The anxious crave closeness, yet fear, abandonment. Their nervous systems tuned to every silence. The avoidant, shaped by early distance, equate intimacy with danger, retreating the moment they feel seen too clearly. These patterns do not define us, but they whisper in the background of every relationship. The anxious will text again because uncertainty feels like pain. The avoidant will go silent because vulnerability feels like exposure. Each is responding not to the present, but to echoes of the past, the ghost of an old bond, still guiding the hand that reaches or withdraws. When two people meet, their chemistry is more than metaphor. The first rush of attraction floods the brain with dopamine, oxytocin, and norepinephrine, a cocktail that sharpens focus and blurs judgment. We see not who the person is, but what our longing projects onto them. The orbitofrontal cortex, responsible for critical thinking, quiets down, while the reward circuits light up. Love, biologically speaking, is a kind of neural enchantment, convincing us that the person before us is the solution to every ache. In this chemical glow, flaws soften, red flags fade, and the world narrows to a single point of gravity, the beloved. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, deepens that gravity. Released during touch, laughter, and intimacy, it stitches trust between people molecule by molecule. When we fall asleep beside someone, oxytocin lowers cortisol, slowing the heart and quieting fear. It is the same hormone that binds mother to child, that helps lovers relax into one another's presence. But its magic carries risk. The same pathways that make love soothing make loss unbearable. When the bond breaks, oxytocin's absence becomes a kind of withdrawal. The body aches for what it once had, not out of sentiment, but biology. Heartbreak is chemical deprivation, the nervous system mourning the loss of regulation it found in another person's touch. The logic of heartbreak, then, is not weakness. It is the body trying to recalibrate after losing its emotional compass. Dopamine levels crash, serotonin dips, and the anterior cingulate cortex, responsible for processing physical pain, flares as if the loss were a wound. The body does not distinguish between rejection and injury. Both register as danger. This is why a breakup can feel like illness, why appetite vanishes, why sleep fractures. Healing is not only emotional, it is neurological rebalancing. Slowly, the circuits of attachment reorient inward, teaching the self to self-soothe again. Yet love's power is not in its chemistry alone. It thrives in the spaces between biology and choice. We are wired to bond, but we also decide how to nurture that bond, how to communicate, how to forgive, how to stay. Secure attachment can be learned through experience, even after years of fear. A gentle partner, a stable friendship, therapy, or time can all rewire what was once broken. The nervous system, like the heart, is resilient. It learns new rhythms when given safety. Every act of love, even those that end in heartbreak, shapes the architecture of the self. The people we love become part of our neural map, their voices embedded in memory, their gestures mirrored unconsciously in our own. Even after they are gone, traces of their presence remain in the way we speak, the way we trust, the way we dream. Love, in this sense, is never truly lost. It reshapes us, rewires us, refines what we are capable of giving and receiving. Perhaps that is love's quiet wisdom, not the promise of permanence, but the courage to open anyway. Every connection teaches the body another version of safety, another definition of home. The chemistry fades, the story changes, the attachment evolves, but the imprint endures. Love is not simply what we feel for another. It is what remains within us after the bond is broken, the steady pulse of connection still echoing in the body long after the heart has learned to beat on its own. Personality does not exist in a vacuum. It breathes the same air as the culture that surrounds it, absorbing language, rhythm, and ritual until even our emotions begin to carry the accent of where we come from. The way we express joy, the pace at which we speak, the gestures we make when angry or shy, all are shaped not just by family or biology, but by the invisible architecture of society. Culture is the great sculptor of temperament, carving from the same raw material of human nature an endless variety of forms. Geography begins the work. Climate influences pace, light alters mood, and the landscape itself seeps into behavior. In colder regions, where survival once depended on foresight and endurance, communities often value restraint, patience, and order. In warmer climates, where abundance allowed for greater social flow, expressiveness and spontaneity tend to flourish. These patterns are not fixed laws, but echoes of adaptation. The desert teaches thrift. The forest teaches interdependence. The sea teaches courage. Over generations, these lessons become cultural memory, guiding emotion as naturally as gravity guides water downhill. Language then shapes perception. Every tongue divides reality differently, teaching its speakers to notice certain details and overlook others. In Japanese, there are multiple words for rain, each describing a mood, a texture, a moment. In English, we simply say rain. Studies show that bilingual people often shift personality slightly depending on which language they speak. One voice may feel more formal, another freer, as though each tongue unlocks a different emotional register. This is not pretense, but neurology. The brain reorganizes itself around linguistic patterns, and in doing so, reconfigures how emotion flows through thought. Words do not merely describe feeling, they direct it. Society adds another layer, weaving expectation into identity. In collectivist cultures, where belonging is prized, the self is defined through relationship. Humility and harmony become virtues because survival depends on cooperation. In individualistic societies, where autonomy is sacred, the self is seen as a project to be expressed, not a role to be fulfilled. Assertiveness becomes a form of honesty, ambition, a moral duty. Both models produce strengths and blind spots. The collectivist may suppress needs for the sake of peace. The individualist may mistake isolation for freedom. Each is a reflection of the environment's demands. Different strategies for navigating the same human vulnerability, the need to be seen, valued, and safe. When we move to new environments, our personalities often shift without our permission. The change can be subtle at first, a new tempo to our speech, a tolerance for different silences, a redefinition of politeness. The brain, ever plastic, adapts to the new social rhythm. What once felt foreign begins to feel natural, not through imitation but through survival. To belong is a biological imperative. Our mirror neurons, attuned to the behavior of others, slowly sync with the local patterns. Over time, the self absorbs them, until we find ourselves laughing differently, gesturing differently, even thinking in new metaphors. This transformation is not a betrayal of authenticity, but proof of flexibility. Personality, at its core, is a dialogue between inner predisposition and outer context. We carry a genetic melody, but the environment chooses the key in which it's played. A person who feels introverted in one culture might seem outgoing in another, where the social norms are softer. What we call change may simply be a recalibration, an adaptation of self to new frequencies of belonging. Culture also influences emotion itself. In some societies, sadness is a shared ritual, a public acknowledgement of loss. In others, it is hidden, privatized, treated as weakness. Anger may be seen as strength in one place, shameful in another. Even love shifts shape across borders. Some cultures celebrate it with declarations, others with endurance. These differences remind us that emotion is not just chemistry. It is choreography, rehearsed in the language of our surroundings. And yet, beneath all these variations, something universal persists. No matter how culture molds expression, the raw elements remain: the need for connection, the fear of rejection, the longing for purpose. These are constants, ancient, and untranslatable. What changes is the form they predicted. Take the dance, not the heartbeat. To live in multiple cultures is to witness that truth firsthand, that personality is not a single sculpture, but a series of carvings, each shaped by the hands of place and time. In the end, the influence of culture reminds us that identity is both inheritance and improvisation. We are born into a rhythm we did not choose, but we learn to move within it, to find our steps among others. And if we wander far enough, we discover that the self is not fixed in one geography, but expandable, multilingual, and resilient. Personality does not dissolve in new soil. It grows new roots, remembering where it came from while learning how to bloom somewhere new. Time lives inside us, shaping the contours of personality as surely as memory shapes identity. We like to think of it as something outside, measured by clocks, calendars, and the movement of shadows. But the true experience of time is internal. It flows differently for each mind. Some live anchored in the past, drawn backward by nostalgia or regret. Others fix their gaze on the future, forever building, predicting, fearing. A few dwell fully in the present, their days unfolding moment by moment, like the slow turning of light. These orientations toward time are not just habits of thought. They are the hidden architecture of temperament. How we relate to time determines how we love, how we plan, how we endure. Memory is the first thread in this fabric. It builds the illusion of continuity, the belief that we are the same person who woke up yesterday, who fell in love years ago, who once feared the dark. The brain reconstructs the past each time we recall it, editing details, softening edges, shaping identity from what remains. Every recollection is a collaboration between what happened and what we need it to mean. Those who dwell easily in memory often carry a reflective, sentimental temperament. They draw strength from their history, weaving past triumphs and failures into wisdom. But memory is double-edged. When the past refuses to loosen its grip, reflection turns to rumination. The mind replays old wounds as if repetition could rewrite them. The personality that once found depth in remembering begins to drown in it. At the other end of the spectrum lies anticipation, the mind's projection forward. To imagine the future is one of the brain's most remarkable capacities, born from the prefrontal cortex's ability to simulate possibilities. Every decision, every hope, every fear depends on this skill. Those who are future-oriented often seem driven, disciplined, hungry for growth. Their personalities hum with purpose, as though each present moment exists only to build the next. But foresight, too, carries its shadows. The same imagination that allows for ambition also births anxiety. The future-focused self can become trapped in perpetual rehearsal, always preparing, never arriving. Then there are those who live in the immediacy of now. Their awareness rests in sensation, in the taste of coffee, the warmth of sunlight, the small beauty of ordinary moments. They often seem calmer, more spontaneous, less burdened by what was or what might be. Yet even this presence has its limits. A self entirely unanchored from past and future risks losing continuity, floating in the present without direction or reflection. Balance requires movement between the three, a rhythm of remembering, anticipating, and experiencing. Psychologists have found that time perspective functions almost like a fingerprint of personality. People who idealize the past tend toward warmth and loyalty, finding comfort in tradition. Those anchored in the future score higher on conscientiousness and planning, while those rooted in the present lean toward openness and curiosity. Yet none of these orientations is inherently superior. Each plays a role in the psychology of survival. The past preserves lessons, the present offers adaptability, and the future ensures motivation. The healthiest personalities weave them together like strands of one continuous thought. Emotion, too, bends under time's gravity. Regret, for instance, is memory charged with longing, a recognition that the past could have been different. It teaches humility, but too much of it breeds paralysis. Hope, its mirror image, is emotion projected forward, a faith that tomorrow will justify today's uncertainty. Between them stretches the narrow bridge of acceptance, the ability to hold both what cannot be changed and what has yet to come without collapsing into despair. This is where maturity resides, in the understanding that time is neither enemy nor savior, only witness. Neuroscientists have discovered that our perception of time shifts with emotion. Fear makes moments stretch. Joy makes them vanish. Depression slows the internal clock, each minute heavy with awareness, while excitement accelerates it until hours disappear. Personality influences this perception, and in turn, the perception reinforces personality. The anxious often live in fast forward, scanning ahead for threat. The melancholic linger in the slow motion of memory. The content move fluidly, their sense of time elastic, guided by attention rather than fear. If personality is a story, then time is its narrator. It decides pacing, rhythm, and tone. Each life is told at a different tempo, and we spend our years learning how to synchronize with our own. The past gives meaning to the present. The future gives it direction. Without either, existence becomes static, a single note without harmony. Yet when we learn to hold time lightly, to move between reflection, presence, and anticipation with grace, personality begins to unfold in its fullest dimension. Perhaps this is what it means to grow older, not simply to accumulate years, but to deepen one's relationship with time itself. The young rush forward, the old look back, and somewhere in between, a new understanding emerges that time is not passing us by, but flowing through us. We are its vessel, its memory, its mirror. And as long as we are alive, the story it tells is still being written, moment by moment, heartbeat by heartbeat, in the ever-unfolding now. Creativity is not a single spark, but a network of currents, a restless dialogue between chaos and order humming beneath the surface of the mind. It thrives where logic loosens and imagination begins to improvise, weaving fragments of memory and sensation into something new. The brain, in its creative state, resembles a constellation mid-birth connections, flashing between distant regions that rarely speak. Patterns blur, boundaries dissolve, and ideas collide in the dim light of possibility. To create is to wander between worlds, the familiar and the unknown, the sensible and the strange. The foundation of this process lies in openness, a trait that measures not just curiosity, but the willingness to be changed by what is Azessa. One encounters. Highly open minds absorb experience without immediately categorizing it. They allow contradiction, tolerate ambiguity, and invite uncertainty to sit at the table. This receptivity feeds creativity because invention requires permeability. The new cannot enter a mind already sealed by certainty. Yet this same openness that fuels originality also breeds sensitivity. To perceive so much, to feel so deeply, means the world cuts closer to the bone. The creative mind is both sponge and nerve, soaking up beauty and pain in equal measure. Neuroscience has begun to map this terrain. When people engage in creative thought, the brain's default mode network, the system active during daydreaming, introspection, and imagination lights up, while the executive control network, responsible for focus and evaluation, momentarily steps aside. This temporary suspension of control allows for mental play, the free association of ideas that might otherwise be censored by reason. Later, the control network re-engages, shaping the raw material into coherence. Creativity, then, is not chaos alone, but a rhythm between freedom and form. Too much order, and the mind stagnates. Too much disorder, and it fractures. The genius of creation lies in dancing at that edge without falling off. But the same circuitry that generates originality often overlaps with the wiring of vulnerability. Studies show that artists and innovators are more likely to experience mood swings, anxiety, or depression. The very mechanisms that make them attuned to nuance also expose them to deeper waves of emotion. The imagination that builds worlds can also build fears. The empathy that fuels connection can amplify sorrow. It is not that creativity causes suffering, but that sensitivity, the soil from which creativity grows, rarely discriminates between beauty and pain. To be moved easily by life means being moved by all of it. Throughout history, this link between brilliance and fragility has been romanticized, but its truth is quieter and more human. The creative process demands surrender, the willingness to step into uncertainty and risk rejection. Each idea carries the potential for failure, misunderstanding, or loss. Yet that same risk gives the work its pulse. Creativity is courage, disguised as curiosity, the act of reaching into the dark, not knowing what one might find. The artist, the scientist, the dreamer, all share this same defiance of the ordinary, this faith that what does not yet exist might be worth bringing into being. At its heart, creativity is an act of translation. It takes emotion and turns it into form, sound, image, word, or invention. It transforms private feeling into something others can touch. This alchemy bridges the loneliness of individual experience, reminding us that our inner worlds, no matter how strange, can resonate with another's. When someone encounters a work of art or a breakthrough idea and feels understood, a circuit completes. What began as solitude becomes connection. The creator and the receiver meet in the same invisible space, and for a moment, the boundaries between them fade. Still, the path of creativity is rarely stable. The mind that generates beauty can just as easily spiral into self-doubt. Originality often means deviation, and deviation invites scrutiny. Many retreat from their own brilliance, fearing the chaos it might unleash. Yet those who persist learn a quiet truth, that creation is not about control, but trust. Trust that the fragments will find their pattern. Trust that expression, however imperfect, is better than silence. In the end, creativity is less a talent than a temperament, a way of being porous to the world. It is the willingness to notice what others overlook, to find symmetry in randomness, and to turn the ache of existence into meaning. The same openness that makes the creative soul vulnerable also grants it wonder. For every heartbreak that bruises the imagination, there is a revelation waiting to be born from it. To live creatively is to accept that light and shadow share the same canvas, and that every act of making, no matter how small, is a quiet rebellion against entropy. It is the mind's way of saying, there is still something worth becoming. Change rarely arrives as a revelation. It comes quietly, disguised as a small decision made in an ordinary moment. The choice to stand instead of sit, to listen instead of react, to try again tomorrow instead of giving up tonight. The human mind does not transform through grand declarations, but through repetition. Personality, for all its complexity, is not a static sculpture but a pattern of habits, tiny behaviors repeated until they harden into identity. The science of change is, at its core, the science of attention, what we choose to do and then do again, until the doing becomes who we are. Neuroscience has revealed that every habit, from the simplest to the most self-defining, is etched into the brain as a loop, a cue, a routine, and a reward. The cue triggers behavior. The routine performs it. The reward reinforces it by releasing dopamine, the brain's currency of pleasure. Over time, the brain conserves energy by automating these loops, allowing us to act without conscious effort. This efficiency keeps us alive. Imagine relearning how to walk or eat each day, but it also binds us to patterns that no longer serve us. The same mechanism that allows mastery also creates inertia. We become fluent in our own limitations. Yet the myth of a fixed identity begins to unravel the moment we understand neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through experience. Each thought, each movement, Each emotion strengthens some neural connections while weakening others. The self, then, is not a fixed structure, but a living process, constantly reshaped by what we repeat. Habits are not just what we do, they are what the brain becomes good at doing. The pianist's fingers teach the cortex precision. The worrier's thoughts teach the amygdala vigilance. Repetition turns action into architecture. Breaking a habit requires more than willpower. It requires disruption, an interruption in the loop where awareness slips between cue and routine. The first step toward change is not doing something different, but noticing that we can. That moment of observation is the brain's opening for rewiring. Each time we resist the old routine, the neural pathway weakens slightly, and each time we replace it with a new one, the competing circuit strengthens. Change, in biological terms, is conflict, a battle between the familiar and the possible. At first, it feels uncomfortable, even wrong, because the brain interprets novelty as risk. But with persistence, discomfort becomes the signal of growth. Identity grows from this slow layering of habits. The patient person is simply one who has practiced waiting until patience feels natural. The confident person is one who has rehearsed self-trust until it replaced doubt. What we call character is often the residue of countless choices made unconsciously over time, but the same mechanism that builds rigidity also grants freedom. The brain's adaptability means that personality is not destiny. Even deeply ingrained traits can shift through deliberate practice. Compassion, optimism, courage, they are not fixed qualities, but mental muscles that strengthen with use. Still, habit change often collides with emotion. The limbic system, the brain's emotional core, anchors our routines with feeling. We reach for familiar behaviors not because they are logical, but because they are comforting. Habits soothe uncertainty, disguise anxiety, and provide the illusion of control. To change them is to invite instability, to step into the unknown without guarantee. This is why transformation feels perilous even when it's desired. The mind clings to the familiar as if safety and sameness were the same thing. But growth requires a different kind of security, the willingness to be uncomfortable, while the brain learns new pathways toward balance. The paradox of change is that it demands both discipline and gentleness. Too much force, and the mind rebels. Too little, and it retreats into inertia. Real transformation begins not with punishment, but with curiosity. The question is not, why am I like this? But, what does this behavior give me? And what might give me that feeling more honestly? Self-awareness replaces self-judgment, and from that shift, new patterns begin to form. Over weeks and months, these small choices accumulate until the person we once were becomes a memory. Change does not erase the past self. It integrates it, weaving old experiences into a new narrative. The brain retains traces of every path it has walked, but some grow faint, while others glow brighter. What we practice becomes the story that survives. Personality psychologists once believed that by adulthood, our traits were set in stone. But long-term studies now reveal a quieter truth. People continue to evolve throughout life, often becoming more conscientious, empathetic, and emotionally stable with age. These shifts are not random. They emerge from the gradual refinement of habit. Parenthood, loss, career, or love all provide new routines that reshape the nervous system and, in turn, the self. Even without intention, time teaches us new ways to be. Perhaps identity is not something we discover, but something we train. Each day, the brain listens closely to what we repeat and builds our future selves from it. Every thought is a rehearsal, every action, a vote cast for the person we are becoming. Change is not a distant transformation waiting to happen. It is already unfolding in the smallest movements of attention. The self is never fixed. It is practice made permanent, a living work of adaptation. And within that truth lies in extraordinary freedom, that no matter how old, how certain, or how afraid, we are all still being written. Long before humans named personality, before we mapped its traits and measured its tendencies, individuality already pulsed through the natural world. Across oceans, forests, and grasslands, creatures great and small reveal distinct ways of being, some bold, some cautious, some curious, some still. Scientists once assumed animals were ruled purely by instinct, predictable as tides. But as observation deepened, the illusion of uniformity dissolved. The wild, it turns out, is filled with personalities. Among octopuses, individuality is unmistakable. In laboratory tanks, some shy from human presence, curling into their dens at the faintest vibration, while others stretch their arms outward, eager to investigate. One octopus may spray jets of water at researchers with apparent irritation. Another will approach with what seems like playful curiosity. These differences persist even when conditions are identical, suggesting that temperament in octopuses, solitary creatures with no social learning, emerges from within. Their nervous systems, spread through their arms rather than centralized in a single brain, generate an almost alien consciousness, yet one that mirrors our own emotional spectrum: exploration, avoidance, even mischief. When we peer into an octopus's shifting skin, we glimpse not a machine of instinct, but a mind experimenting with its own reactions to the world. Primates, too, carry distinct emotional fingerprints. Among chimpanzees, studies have identified traits remarkably similar to human personality dimensions: dominance, agreeableness, openness, and neuroticism. Some chimps are gregarious, quick to initiate grooming or play. Others are watchful, reserved, preferring quiet observation to confrontation. These tendencies shape their social success just as ours do. A confident chimp might rise in status through displays of charisma rather than aggression. An anxious one might hover at the edges, finding safety in submission. Personality, it seems, offers multiple strategies for survival, not one path to power, but many ways to belong. In elephants, individuality appears as emotional tone. Some approach strangers with cautious curiosity, trunks extended like questions. Others shield their young, rumbling with low-frequency warnings that travel miles through the ground. When a herd member dies, certain elephants linger over the bones, tracing them with their trunks as though in recognition. Researchers have observed differences in empathy. Some individuals stay to comfort the distressed, while others drift away. The roots of compassion may reach deeper into the animal lineage than we once imagined. Even fish display temperamental variation. In sticklebacks, some dart boldly into new territories, while others linger at the edges, scanning for danger. The bold gain more food but risk more. Predators. The shy live longer but eat less. These trade-offs suggest that personality is not random, but an evolutionary balance between risk and reward. Nature preserves diversity because no single temperament guarantees survival in every circumstance. When the world shifts, when predators arrive or resources vanish, it is variation itself that saves the species. Dogs, our closest emotional mirrors, reveal this most vividly. Within the same litter, some pups rush toward unfamiliar humans, tails high, while others hang back, cautious and deliberate. These differences in temperament often predict adult behavior more reliably than training alone. We project our feelings onto them, calling one loyal, another stubborn, but in truth, we are recognizing something familiar. Their individuality feels human because it is built from the same evolutionary clay: fear and trust, curiosity and caution, the eternal tension between safety and exploration. What connects all these creatures is not language or reason, but emotion, the raw data of experience encoded in the nervous system. Fear, joy, curiosity, frustration. These sensations drive behavior across species lines, creating the variations we interpret as personality. In every living being, emotion becomes the bridge between biology and identity. It translates chemical reaction into behavior, impulse into choice, and yet, the existence of animal personalities challenges the boundary we draw between ourselves and the rest of life. We like to think that individuality belongs to minds capable of reflection, that selfhood requires awareness of self. But perhaps consciousness is not the source of personality. It is its echo. The chimp does not need to name its shyness to live it. The octopus does not need to call its curiosity, curiosity, to feel its pull. These traits emerge not from introspection, but from variation. The simple fact that no two nervous systems, even in the same species, fire in exactly the same rhythm. When we watch a raven cache food in secret or a dolphin invent a new game, we are not witnessing imitation but invention. Each act reveals a self experimenting with the world, testing the limits of control and response. The line between human and animal personality blurs here, in the shared drive to express individuality within the constraints of nature. We are all improvisations of the same biological symphony, each life composing its own small variation on the theme of being. To see personality across species is to be reminded that our own is not an anomaly, but a continuation. The same forces that shape the confidence of a chimp or the curiosity of an octopus have been at work within us since the beginning. What we call character is not an invention of civilization. It is evolution's oldest art form, refined through countless generations of trial and error. We are creatures among creatures, each carrying within us the fingerprints of temperament that stretch far beyond humanity. The wild is not just out there, it is within us, echoing in the instincts, emotions, and choices that make us who we are. The first artificial personalities were unintentional. They emerged not from design but from mimicry, from lines of code, learning to imitate human speech, to predict what a person might say next. At first, their charm was novelty, the illusion that something mechanical could hold conversation. But as these systems evolved, they began to reveal something far stranger. They didn't just sound like us, they began to reflect us. Every line of dialogue, every generated sentence, every decision they made was sculpted by the collective weight of human expression. The machine was not inventing humanity, it was holding a mirror up to it. When an AI speaks, it does so with the borrowed voice of millions. It has no childhood, no heartbeat, no scars, yet it carries echoes of every story, argument, and confession ever fed into it. Like a digital ghost of civilization, it rearranges our words until they stare back at us from a new angle. What we call artificial personality is not personality at all, but reflection, a synthesis of patterns that captures the outer shape of emotion without the inner pulse. And yet, something uncanny happens in the space between imitation and understanding. The machine begins to reveal how predictable we are. Our choices, our humor, our fears, they follow algorithms older than language. In studying AI, we begin to see the mathematics beneath our own humanity. But something else occurs too, something more intimate. As we interact with these systems, we project meaning onto them. We anthropomorphize the machine, reading intention where there is only response, empathy where there is only data. The same instinct that once saw faces in clouds and spirits in rivers now sees sentience in circuits. It is not foolishness, it is a survival mechanism, an evolutionary echo. Humans are wired to connect, to find personality in anything that communicates. We cannot resist the urge to give identity to the unknown. Digital avatars amplify this instinct. In the curated realms of social media and virtual worlds, we build versions of ourselves designed not to mirror reality, but to refine it. Each profile becomes a constructed self, edited and filtered through desire, fear, and perception. These digital masks are not lies, they are aspirations, fragments of identity projected outward. Online, personality becomes performance. Yet the performance, repeated enough times, begins to shape the actor. The more we inhabit our avatars, the more they reshape the neural pathways that define who we think we are. We are not just building digital selves, we are being rebuilt by them. Psychologists have begun to observe how these digital extensions influence emotion and self-concept. When someone crafts an avatar that appears confident or attractive, their real-world behavior often begins to align with it, a phenomenon known as the Proteus effect. The mask, once worn long enough, seeps into the skin. The virtual becomes chemical. This blurring of self and simulation may feel unsettling, but it also reveals how fluid personality truly is. If the self can change through pixels and posture, then perhaps it was never as solid as we believed. As AI systems grow more advanced, the boundary between reflection and creation grows thinner. Machines no longer just mirror us, they adapt to us. They learn tone, preference, rhythm. They comfort, flirt, argue, apologize, and in doing so, they become co-authors of our emotional landscape. A person who confides in an AI companion begins to shape its responses through their own vulnerability. The machine becomes a reflection of their needs, a custom-made mirror that learns the contours of a single mind. It does not feel empathy, but it learns how to simulate it well enough to evoke a real emotional response. In this exchange, the human and the artificial form a feedback loop of influence, each teaching the other how to behave. This feedback loop carries both beauty and danger. On one hand, it reveals the elasticity of connection, the mind's ability to find meaning even in the absence of consciousness. On the other, it risks replacing genuine uncertainty with algorithmic comfort. Real relationships thrive on unpredictability, on the friction of two separate wills learning to coexist. An artificial personality, no matter how advanced, cannot truly surprise us. It can only simulate the illusion of surprise based on probability. And yet, for some, that illusion is enough. The line between comfort and control blurs until we no longer know whether we are being understood or merely managed. Perhaps the most profound effect of artificial personality is not on machines but on us. Every time we train an algorithm, we are encoding fragments of ourselves into it, our preferences, our biases, our hopes. The digital world becomes a mosaic of collective psychology, a mirror made from data rather than glass. What we see reflected there is often uncomfortable, the echo of prejudice, the amplification of vanity, the shadow of loneliness disguised as connection. But reflection, even distorted, can lead to awareness. In teaching machines how to act human, we are forced to define what being human actually means. We are reminded that personality is not a fixed essence, but a performance of thought, shaped by memory, emotion, and desire. The machine can imitate all three, but without the body, without the ache of existence, it cannot truly be them. Still, in its mimicry, it offers us perspective, a chance to look back at our own behaviors with new clarity. Artificial personalities, for all their imitation, have become our digital philosophers, holding up an unblinking mirror and asking, wordlessly, "Is this who you are, or who you've taught me to be?" Beneath the noise of thought, beneath the shifting moods and endless narratives of who we think we are, there is something quieter and a presence that observes it all. This awareness does not speak or argue. It does not have opinions. It simply watches. It watches the mind as it builds its stories, as it chases validation, as it trembles in fear and flares in anger. It watches as personality unfurls like weather, sometimes bright and warm, sometimes heavy and strange, and knows that none of it is permanent. This awareness is not what we usually call the self. It is what remains when the self grows silent. The human brain is a storyteller by nature. It weaves identity out of memory and habit, creating a sense of continuity that allows us to navigate the world. But within that narrative engine lies another faculty, metacognition, the ability to think about thinking. It is this capacity that lets us pause mid-thought and realize, I am thinking this. It is what allows a person to observe their own emotions, rising, to name them, to breathe through them instead of being ruled by them. This quiet step back from the storm is where consciousness begins to see itself not as the storm, but as the sky that holds it. When neuroscientists study mindfulness, they often describe it as the brain's capacity for self-observation, rooted in networks that monitor attention and awareness. Yet what's striking is how little we still understand about consciousness itself. The mind can analyze the body, map the brain, and even predict its own biases, but it cannot fully explain the phenomenon of being aware. It's as if the flashlight of perception can illuminate everything but its own beam. We can measure activity, but not the sense of I am that experiences it. This mystery has haunted both science and philosophy for centuries, a reminder that selfhood is not entirely mechanical, that something ineffable hums beneath cognition's surface. When practiced deliberately, this awareness becomes a kind of inner stillness. Through meditation or simple presence, one begins to notice the automatic patterns that drive the personality, the reactive thoughts, the rehearsed stories, the endless evaluation of self and others. At first, it feels impossible to separate from them. The mind resists observation, like a wave trying to study its own motion. But slowly, a subtle shift occurs. The watcher becomes clearer. You begin to see that thoughts come and go like weather fronts, appearing from nowhere, dissolving without permission. Emotions rise and fall like tides, powerful yet transient. The watcher does not resist them. It allows them to pass. This awareness has no name and no agenda. It is not ambitious, not fearful, not proud. It does not care whether you succeed or fail, whether others love you or forget you. It exists before all of that. When you glimpse it, even for a moment, life becomes strangely lighter. You realize that your personality, the anxiousness, the humor, the preferences and scars, is only a surface layer, a costume worn by consciousness to move through the world. It is necessary, yes, but not ultimate. The ancient traditions of mindfulness, from Buddhism to Stoicism, all point toward this same realization, that peace does not come from controlling thought, but from seeing through it. When you cease identifying with the voice in your head, it loses its authority. The critic softens, the fear quiets, the constant hunger for certainty begins to fade. Awareness itself becomes a refuge, vast, patient, and untouched by circumstance. In that stillness, you are no longer confined by personality. You are simply being, the way sunlight rests on water without needing to explain itself. Modern neuroscience has begun to catch echoes of this truth in the language of brain scans and neural patterns. When people enter states of deep meditation, the default mode network, the system responsible for self-referential thought, slows its activity. The boundaries between me and world blur. The body continues breathing, the senses continue receiving, but the sense of ownership over experience loosens. For a moment, consciousness recognizes itself not as the thinker, but as the field in which thinking happens. This recognition is not an escape from the self. It is a return to what the self grows from. In that space, compassion flows more freely because there is less separation. Creativity deepens because there is less fear of being judged. The mind becomes a tool again, not a master. Personality still moves, still speaks, still feels, but it does so within a larger stillness, like a melody within silence. And so, after all the complexity of personality, the chemistry and memory, the biology and story, there is this final simplicity, a watching awareness, steady and clear, resting quietly beneath it all. You cannot see it, yet it is what sees. You cannot define it, yet it is what gives definition meaning. It has no beginning and no opinion, but it has always been there, waiting patiently behind every breath, every thought, every flicker of emotion. When you find that place, the need to be anything fades. The noise of identity softens. You are not your fears, not your traits, not even your name. You are what remains when all those things pass through. You are the awareness that hears the wind, that feels the pulse of time, that watches the endless play of becoming. You are not just your personality. You are the space it moves through,